Good evening, everybody. This is Tony with Torrey Harmon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are excited to answer your questions. We have a slew of them that have already come in through email. Thank you so much. It helps to just move things on and making it go faster. We'd like to let everybody know who attends tonight that this is not scripted. So whatever questions come through, we're answering them on the fly. So please bear with us if sometimes we might need to take a second and gather our thoughts. Also, if you want to ask a question while the webinar is going on, type it in the chat box. And I am displaying this sticky note right now that says, type messages here, and I will display that right there. Excuse me. But everybody that is here, welcome and thank you so much. You will not be able to communicate. We try to, confidentiality is our biggest key factor. And so if you have a question, type it in, we'll answer it. But we're so excited. Tonight is the first time that Torrey gets to join us. And Torrey comes to Yes after his desire to want to help so many people just find healing in their life. He's seen so much pain and sorrow in this lifetime that he was just done with it, and he wanted to reach out and help. So he decided, just like Rob, to change professions, go back and get his license. Torrey, welcome. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you very much, Tony. No, I think you hit it on the head pretty well. I love, as you said, I love helping people, and I love working with people, and you know, people are just, it's one of my passions to get to know people and to provide anything that can help them in their life to feel more peace, to feel more confidence, to just find happiness and move forward. So I'm really excited to be here tonight, and thank you for the opportunity.
And as always, I always forget to do the last-minute maintenance stuff. Can everybody hear us okay? Please just type yes in the chat box. Let us know that you can hear us and that we're not just talking to ourselves here. Okay, well, we have questions coming in. Does that mean you can hear us? Can you hear us okay? I have more questions that just came in. I have another question that just came in. Can you hear us? Please let us know. Type in yes in the box. Hello, can you hear us? I have questions coming in, but I do not know if people are hearing us. One second, Torrey. I just need to confirm this really quick. You
Sure.
can hear me, correct, Torrey, without any problems?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Then I am just going to see. Okay, I hear you. Great. Fantastic. Okay, they can hear us. Great, 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 great. Okay,
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Our first question is going to come to us. It is, I find myself in the addiction cycle, and I cannot find any sort of motivation to drag myself out. I do not feel inspired to get out. Do you have any suggestions?
That's a wonderful question. Wonderful because of the fact that it's, I mean, thank you for being so real about that, first of all. I appreciate the honesty that comes with that question, because change brings with it a lot of complicated factors. It's not easy to embrace the idea of change, to change something that is heavily embedded in many aspects of our lives. So I first of all compliment you for the desire to express such honesty and to just face something that's been difficult for you. Secondly, to find motivation, I think some of the exercises and some of the conversations that we go through with clients often involve the idea of looking at the future and looking at what do I want in my future? What do I see myself doing in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now? Even at the end of my life, what do I think I want to be able to look back on? And is the behavior, the addictive behavior, something that I always want to be there? Is it something that I feel like, yeah, I'm okay with that? And often I think clients will find that they typically will see that it's something that, even though it may not be completely disruptive and overwhelming to life right this moment. At least they don't see it that way. It's still probably something that eventually they do want to make a change with, and so they do find some motivation, but it can take time. So I think the answer to that question can vary a lot by individual, but I think a lot of people will find that over time, with a lot of contemplation about what they want to achieve in life, the degree of peace and happiness and balance that they have in their lives, they will often find a desire to change. I guess I would add too that there are many who initially kind of look at change positively, but from the perspective of wanting to change for others, and that's often something that is to a degree motivating, definitely, but something that will ultimately give way to a longer lasting source of motivation, which is that internal desire for change. So my suggestion would be give it some thought, some contemplation. Think about what you want your life to be like in the future. Think about the balance and the peace and the accomplishments and all those kinds of things that you want to do in your life, and see where that puts you. And that may help drive some motivation for change that way.
I was also just going to add to that, this is something that I really, really grasp onto, is because a lot of time motivation is connected with our why, which you kind of just hinted at there, is why are you wanting recovery? Why are you wanting to do what you're wanting to do? Why is it that you ask these questions? When you start asking yourself these why questions, you can really start to discover the true intent, the true motivator. And then when times get tough, which they will, we're going to be honest with you, when times get tough, you can say, you know what, I'm doing this because of X. I'm doing this because of Y. And what I always say is you first discover your superficial why. That superficial why is just kind of like, well, I do it, for somebody who is wanting to earn money, I do it to earn money. Well, no, that's not really why you're doing it. Why? Ask yourself the deeper questions so you can get that darker answer that is embedded deep below the surface. So I would say first go through that exercise. Ask yourself why you're doing this. Ask yourself, what can you do to prepare you for what you're wanting to do? And as you do that, you'll be quite surprised. And do stay engaged with us. You have our email, send it to me. I'll correspond with you via email. You can send an email just through our website. Go to pornstinks.com, and I will interact with you. But thank you for that question. If that did not answer your question well enough, please ask for any clarifyings. Most programs I've tried have always some kind of personal inventory where you go over regrets, mistakes, etc., and try to find peace with them either by apologizing or making the situation right. I find completing this inventory very hard because I have no idea where to start, how to do it. I am logically orderly person, so I look for steps. I don't know how far back I should go or what to include. Can you explain why this is so important and provide some guidance on my issues to completing the inventory?
Wow, thank you for that question. There's a lot of very in-depth topics within that one question, so I'll do my best to try to help answer those. So a personal inventory is very commonly used in the therapy world, especially in terms of addiction recovery, as a means to promote healing. The idea would be that each of us has an opportunity to take a look at the past and to consider what we're changing and why we're changing it, and to go back to the first question, the motivation for change. We're going to consider why we want to make changes in our lives, and then to ultimately be able to move forward, we want to be able to identify ways that we're making actual change. And so I love the fact that you brought up the question about logic, because you seem like a very logical person, a person who wants to look for say, a cause and effect kind of relationship, or a step-by-step progression. If I do this, then what will happen, kind of thing. And that's wonderful, because I think you can take a look at how steps toward healing can be helpful. One of those steps is to be able to simply recognize what is it in my life that I'm changing? What am I trying to accomplish? With the first question we mentioned, the why is very important. With this question, it's more about the what, and then potentially what is the result of that. A lot of the clients that I've worked with will take a very deep personal reflection when they do a personal inventory, and definitely they will mention, especially in an individual session or maybe in a couple session, that the experience was very heavy. It was very sobering, and I use that word in terms of identifying the seriousness of what they're trying to change. So they're taking it very seriously because they see the impact on their lives. And so the logic would be, okay, I can see the impact that this has had on my life, and definitely. There's always the ability, when someone is looking at change in life, recovery from addiction, one can definitely see the need for change that comes with that desire. They can see why things are disruptive in their lives. They can see how their relationships are affected. They can see how jobs and goals and service in their church or other things in their lives are heavily impacted by all of those things. And that brings with it a lot of desire for change. And then when you couple that with the idea that seeing what the impact has been on one's life can allow you to say, okay, I am turning the page. I am making a change here. I'm turning the page. I'm moving forward in my life. I think the idea of progression and healing comes very much into play there, because we have the ability to say, I'm not dwelling on the past. I've recognized it. I've seen it. I know the impact that it's had on my life. But the past doesn't own me. It doesn't define me. It doesn't dictate my future. One of the comments that we often, or concepts I should say, that we often talk about when it comes to thinking about the future in relation to addiction recovery is the idea of future tripping, where we might have the tendency to say, well, it's always been this way, so therefore it will continue to be that way in the future. I've had this challenge, therefore it will continue in the future, and that kind of a thing, even to the point where hopelessness and depression can creep in. Therefore, the idea of looking toward the next chapter of life, looking toward healing, and reflecting on the past only to the point where we see the impact it's had, and then we make that formal commitment to move forward. That's why we feel like that's something that can be very helpful. Now, having said that, it's not always true that everyone's ready at the same time to go through that process. It can take time. It can be very slow for some. It can be very quick for some to get to that point where they're ready to jump into a very deep personal review of their past and look at how the addiction has impacted their life. But with that idea of you do it when you're ready, that's what we try to do is help you through that process when it's time, and to the degree that you want to. Sometimes clients want to dive into it very deeply. Other times they want to address it briefly and then move forward. And either way, it can be very helpful in healing. So what a great question that is. Hopefully I answered that. There were a number of questions in that. Those are my thoughts right now. If you have any further questions on that, please go ahead and submit those.
Along those lines also, I just want to point out that if somebody has slipped up and they've completed a moral inventory, it is not necessary to go back and relive everything again. Go from the last point you slipped and process from there. Don't go back to when you were 5. If you've never done the full inventory, then we strongly recommend you do it. we've had many people that think, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but when they start diving into it, it's the most difficult thing that they've ever had to do in their life. But once you've done that, don't relive it. Move on, move forward, and look towards what the day is bringing you today, not what was in the past.
Right. Well said, Tony. Very good.
You can tell I've talked to a lot of people who have struggled with this, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
What is the most effective personal strategy against porn addiction?
Wow, what a question. The most effective personal strategy against porn addiction. Is that what it was?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I think the first answer that I would say is that will vary depending on the individual, number one. There are so many things that are going to be a source of strength for a given individual, and it will vary. You know, there are so many different aspects of that. But maybe I'll give you a couple of examples of things that can be a huge source of personal strength. One that I find very important for clients is the idea that we can learn how to accept ourselves for who we are, imperfections and all. I think it's very easy to get caught in the cycle of shame when it comes to addiction. In fact, that's really, we call pornography the perfect poison. The perfect poison for keeping the addiction to pornography going, in most cases, is shame. And so, because shame is such a very profound human emotion, among the deepest emotions that we can possibly feel, it's so profound that it can detract us from our goals. It can help us to, or I shouldn't say help, but it can cause us to feel hopeless, unmotivated. It can encourage us to remain in a state of, I guess what we'd call lack of change, or homeostasis is the therapeutic term for that, where we just stay in that cycle because we don't believe we can ever break free from that. So I think one of the strongest elements that is involved is a personal strategy for overcoming pornography addiction, and you can generalize that to other forms of addictions and other mental health issues as well, is that idea of shame. We contrast the shame idea with guilt. Now, initially one might think, well, shame and guilt are essentially the same thing, the same emotion. And there are some similarities in terms of how you feel. You feel badly, right? You feel something negative in terms of a behavior. But while shame, as I just said, encourages hopelessness, self-doubt, a lack of motivation, even a lack of responsibility, on the other hand, guilt can actually be a helpful feeling, because while we recognize something is unwanted and is as a negative in our life, we also believe that we can change. And so the belief in the ability to change can be very powerful. It can be very encouraging. It can be very hopeful. And my belief is that the reason why you're watching this today is because you want to believe that it's possible to overcome some of these challenges in life. And I'm here to tell you that it's very possible. There are many people who have experienced wonderful changes in their lives, have found great peace because of a personal strategy like simply working on the difference between shame and guilt. I'm going to work on not shaming myself, not telling myself I'm such a terrible person for what I'm doing, but instead acknowledging I want to make a change, acknowledging the reality of an unwanted behavior, and simply making a decision that it's not going to hold us back, that we're going to be able to move forward. Now, that doesn't make it easy. Certainly, there are steps along the way, and recovery is a process. It's something that is long term. In fact, most would consider that recovery in itself is a lifelong process of managing a behavior. There's no official graduation from a certain kind of behavior. especially when it comes to a sexual addiction, because the sexual drive within us is such a human experience. It's a natural human instinct. It doesn't go away. It's not meant to go away. And how grateful we are for it. But we learn to manage that, and that is definitely a big part of the recovery aspect. So I think to answer the question, personal strategy that's very effective regarding combating an addiction to pornography. I think working really hard to see the difference between shame and guilt, and allowing yourself the chance to feel good about yourself and your prospect at being able to make a recovery and move forward is a huge part of that. I guess I would add too that another really good strategy is to have good support in place. You know that it's going to be a road that takes a while to travel on. And so knowing that it's a process, it's not just a step, you can have, for example, a spouse, a significant other, a loved one, family members like siblings or parents, mentors, people who are important in your life, such as a religious or ecclesiastical leader, that type of thing. Those supportive people around you can form a very powerful network of people who you trust and who you can open up to, and they can reinforce, again, that sense of progress, that sense of there's hope for me, there's a fighting chance for me to do this and to find greater peace and happiness in my life. So those are a couple of initial thoughts that I have on some very important personal strategies for overcoming that. And you can also talk about other things like recognizing and managing triggers as another very important element. Recognizing the environments in which we can find ourselves where triggers are more likely, where the desire to act out in that sexual behavior that's unwanted, viewing pornography or masturbation, those kinds of things can happen in certain situations more often than in others. And so recognizing a situation, for example, being really bored, being lonely, feeling a lot of stress, feeling overwhelmed and frustrated with things in life, those kinds of emotions can definitely lead to a greater challenge of trying to battle with that addiction. And so knowing that those are a very likely challenging environment to be in or emotion to feel can help us to say, okay, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to know, this is a challenge. I'm feeling lonely. What can I do to address feeling lonely right now? If I'm bored, what can I do with that? How can I empower myself to not be so susceptible in this moment, knowing that it's likely to be a bigger challenge for me. So those are a few ideas for you. Hopefully I answered that question for you.
One of the things that I had a lot of people say is they get out and they start doing other things. They think about other people. They help other people, and that helps them to focus on, the recovery process in a way that it's not the ultimate focus. And that's been tremendously successful for a lot of people.
Very
the next question.
Tony,
what's that?
Sorry, Tony. I was just going to add to that the idea of, like you mentioned, service and so forth. I would add that often when we work with people on addiction recovery, interestingly enough, our sessions, our work is not 100% focused on the addiction. We talk a lot about other areas of life and service to other people, working to accomplish career goals, develop life skills. Things like that are also relationship building and relationship enhancement. Those things are also part of what we talk about because you're right, Tony, as you just said, there are other things that can help to strengthen us in addition to the actual focus on the addiction.
Okay, this one comes from a gentleman. He says, is it okay to masturbate without porn? I heard it is healthy to reduce prostate cancer.
Oh, okay. Very good question. So, I'm not a doctor, and I don't even play one on TV. But I have heard, similar statements being made in the medical world, and So something that I think is important to keep in mind is that the definition of being okay is a very personal thing. I don't think that it would be appropriate for anyone to determine if, for example, masturbation in and of itself is okay or not okay because of the fact that there are personal values involved in that as well. There are those who have faith-based values that would say, masturbation is wrong. I don't believe in doing that. That is something that I don't agree with. It's against my value system. There are others who say, it's not against my value system. It's something that is a natural thing, and as long as it's not disrupting my life, causing me to have problems with relationships or problems with my career or whatever, that it's okay. And so I think to answer the question, is it okay? It's very difficult to say whether it's okay for you. I think the ultimate answer lies within your value system to say whether that's okay. And then not only the value system, but also the idea of whether or not the behavior is something that is compulsive, addictive, where it is starting to become disruptive in life. At that point, that's a kind of a different question where, if you say, I feel like I am beyond the ability to decide, it's beyond my decision, I'm compelled to do it. Most people would probably look at that situation and say, it's not okay because I'm compelled and I feel that addiction, that power kind of overtaking my ability to choose, and I'm not comfortable with that. And so that would be something to keep in mind too. Is do I feel okay with that that propensity, I guess you could call it, where addictive behavior can be very disruptive. So hopefully that answers that question. I think I have heard some people in the medical world make comments about masturbation being something that can be healthy. I can't really comment on that personally because I've seen kind of both sides of that issue, to be honest. I've seen people who have never done that and have felt very, very healthy and at peace with that. On the other hand, I've also had people say that that's a regular practice in their lives and that they also feel at peace with that. And so it's a very personal decision. I think I guess I would also say that I'm not aware of any sort of medical problem with doing that. It doesn't necessarily cause problems per se. I can't really comment on the idea that it could possibly battle or keep you from prostate cancer. That's a great question for a doctor, certainly. But I think ultimately the question comes down to what do I feel is right for me in my life, and based on my behaviors, the balance in my life, my values, all that kind of stuff.
I want to take a second and address this too, because this is a frequent question that I get on a regular basis, and I always counter with the question of, why are you asking that question?
Yeah.
It's really, if you're asking that question, then there's something that's causing you to think either it's not okay, or are you looking for justification? What is the reason that you're asking that question? And because of a lot of times, we've had a lot of people that say after they masturbate that they find that they're extremely kind of foggy-headed, and their thought process isn't correct, and so there's all levels of if it's okay or not okay. There's all kinds of stories in between, and not. I always go back to, why are you asking that question, and what answer were you hoping it would be? Because then to me, that's helping to either justify the behavior, or is it truly just educational? So yeah, good point. And whoever submitted that, I appreciate the honest question. If you want to follow up with any additional details on the motivation for that question, I'd be happy to talk about that as well. 3 months ago, I thought I was over this. I was, it turns out, way too confident, arrogant about, in fact. Then I had a fallback, a bad one. I got caught, my marriage was severely strained. I am now clean, but nowhere as, nowhere as stupidly confident as before. I realize I am and always will be an addict, but I will be a recovering addict. To all,
Mm-hmm.
overconfidence can do a lot of harm. We must be humble when facing our addiction. No place for cockiness when remission comes. Thank you for that statement. We really appreciate it because there's a lot of truth to that. Because we start thinking, oh yeah, we can push the edge, we can go closer to that cliff, when in actuality, that's when we get in trouble. So thank you for stating that.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. That's a very interesting point. I think, I mean, it seems to me that the reason that was shared was because there was a desire to help other people to understand the importance of putting relapse in perspective, number one, and number two, understanding that it is possible to be overconfident about your ability to overcome something. Now, having said that, I certainly don't want to take away from the ability that we have to master something. We do have the ability to master something over the course of our lives. I'm a firm believer in the fact that everything that we do is a lifelong process of becoming better and mastering things. Whether it's inside of the world of addiction recovery or not, whether it's more broad than that, I believe that everything we do is a lifelong process of mastery. Quick analogy, maybe two analogies actually. One is I'm also a musician. I play the piano. One of my passions in life is to play music, and so that's something that I think of immediately when I think of mastering something. I think of the idea behind that. I feel like I'm pretty skilled on the piano at this point in my life, since I've been playing since I was a young child. But at the same time, I know that there are others in the world who are better than me. They're more skilled than I am. There are musical pieces that are written that I can't play, that I would have to really, really try hard to be able to master those. And so I see that as a lifelong process to develop the talent. And in a similar way, I think addiction recovery is a lifelong process. So that's one point. The second point is the idea behind addressing relapse and being able to move forward from relapse. When I talk to clients about relapse, I definitely like to reinforce the idea that relapse brings with it a new opportunity. All is not lost with relapse. There's another analogy that I frequently refer to with clients, and that is the idea of someone climbing a mountain. We use safety ropes when we're climbing, and the reason for that is that if we fall, the rope will catch us so that we don't fall dangerously far and potentially injure ourselves or worse. And the same is true in terms of addiction recovery. We put safety measures in place. We put strategies in place and steps toward recovery to try to help us move forward. And sometimes we'll slip and fall. In fact, I would say that relapse is generally expected as a part of recovery. Very few times can a client, a person, an individual move forward in the addiction recovery process and never slip. So that is a very real thing. On the other hand, there's a fine line between being confident and overly confident, as was mentioned in that question or that statement. I would agree that it is possible to be overconfident, but the reason why that's possible is because it's human nature to become complacent. That is human nature. It's part of who we are to say, well, all is well. And so as a result of all being well, I'm going to let my guard down a little bit, and I'm going to be okay, and hey, it's great, eat, drink, and be merry, that kind of a thing. And so once we do that, then the chances there, it increases to possibly have a relapse or an issue. So keep in mind that the brain is very powerful. And as we talk about the two parts of the brain with addiction recovery, we talk about one particular area of the brain. Many of you probably, as you've been learning more about addiction, have learned about the limbic system, the limbic part of the brain. It houses the instincts and the emotions and the memories, and all that stuff is processed in that area of the brain. And it's so incredibly powerful. It's very powerful. You think about the urge to survive. That's part of what's generated in that part of the brain, a survival instinct. So if we have a survival instinct that is so naturally powerful, it's also going to have a very powerful instinct to turn to something that is rewarding, like acting out in an addiction that has a temporary reward associated with it. So being overly confident can happen because we can say to ourselves, "Hey, we've overcome this instinct, this limbic part of our brain. We've mastered it," and oftentimes that can cause the limbic system to basically defend itself, and it'll say, "Hey, I'm going to defend myself here. I'm going to look out for me, do what's best for me," and so again, if we let the guard down a little bit, there's a chance for doing that. But anyway, ultimately, there's a strong. Every one of us has the strong ability to master things over our lives, and so I think it's very important to keep that in mind. That be cautiously optimistic. Have humble confidence is another way to put that. To say, yeah, I'm mastering this, I'm managing this, but it's never completed, so to speak. It's something that's always in the works.
How can I best help and support my spouse who deals with pornography addiction?
That's a wonderful question, too. Boy, these questions are fabulous. I appreciate all of you submitting these. How can you best support your spouse? I think one of the things that a spouse of someone who is recovering from addiction can be very, very helpful in doing is to simply be willing to be there for that person. As I mentioned earlier tonight, shame is one of the greatest challenges associated with an addiction. It perpetuates an addiction. It keeps it alive. It keeps it going. It keeps it hidden. It creates a lack of safety in terms of being able to share. One would feel a lack of safety in being able to share the realities of their addictive behavior with others, especially a spouse. So even though a spouse will be, someone who is generally the closest person to us and has bonded with us tremendously in many ways, the shame would keep us from sharing that simply because a person recovering from addiction is going to feel unsafe in sharing and like they're not going to be accepted. And so I think it's very, very important for a spouse to understand the nature of addiction and to understand that being there for that person, creating that sense of acceptance. For example, a thought for a spouse of a recovering person could be something like this: I may not be experiencing it, but I can be there for that person. I can accept that person for who they are and love them and be there for them. Now, I think the other part of the question here that needs to be said is that a spouse is going through their own healing process too. And that's a very important factor to keep in mind. So a wife of a recovering addict, the husband, or vice versa, would need to understand that they have their own process to go through. They're going to feel some very difficult emotions and some very difficult challenges themselves. So to know that they will be experiencing some of their own emotional challenges and have emotional needs is also very important for being there for each other. So the idea of being there for each other is very important in that recovery process.
One of the things I wanted to stay with that is we have a lot of people that are dealing with this, and you're not alone. And it's important for you're doing the steps to support your husband or your spouse, is to know that is the knowledge. once you have the knowledge, then you are armed with the tools that can better help. It's the lack of knowledge and the desire to just kind of bury your head in the sand is where the greatest danger is in place. But I want to be careful that you also need healing. This is something that we are fully aware of, that there's a healing process that each spouse has to go through in this. And so to look for those healing opportunities as well, being able to share, use our contact form through pornstinks.com, use that to reach out, and just, even if it's just to dump and just to get it out so that you have somebody to talk to. We're here to help.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. I am kind of in a state where I can't remember things properly. Even if I do remember them now, after half an hour, they're gone. Why is that?
Okay, very, very interesting question. I'm going to answer that, provide some thoughts on that within the context of one assumption, which is that the question is being asked in the context of someone who's recovering from pornography addiction or a similar addiction. So with that assumption in mind, I think it's interesting because the recovery process when it comes to addiction involves so many elements within our brains that it's really interesting how the brain can have different kinds of responses to stimulus. Sometimes they're conscious, sometimes they're subconscious. So something that's interesting is the way the brain can attempt to cope with something negative. What's interesting is that the brain can heal over time, as many of you are familiar with. There's a term called neuroplasticity, where that basically means that the brain can literally mold itself. It can form new connections, neural connections, that are healing in terms of the ability to process thoughts and emotions differently and form new patterns of thoughts and behaviors and so forth. Along with that idea, the brain is also going to look for ways to, again, as I said just a second ago, cope with the challenges that it's facing. So, for example, if we become, I'll use kind of an analogy here, if we become overly stimulated, for example, overly stressed out, the brain has the ability to sort of say, okay, I'm overloaded, I can't handle anymore, I'm going to shut down. And it's a protection, it's a self-preservation mechanism that can be built into our brain processes. So many of you have heard of the term fight or flight. In kind of a similar way, that can be sort of a flight from an excess of stress or an excess of fear or anxiety, depression, things like that, where the brain can literally cause certain functions to be repressed. So memory, interestingly enough, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is housed within the limbic part of the brain again, as I mentioned. And so with it being housed there, it's interesting how because emotions and instinctual drives are all part of that same limbic system, it can seek to self-preserve by doing certain things that we may or may not even be aware of. One possibility is that your brain could be saying, okay, I've got too much to think about, I can't handle this or that and the other, I'm overwhelmed, and I need to protect myself. And so memory problems may be something that could result from that. And you'll often see people who are struggling with an immense addictive behavior in their life will generally have some other concern, some other issue that is presenting itself as well in terms of the mental health status, such as depression or anxiety or maybe there's some emotional issues like lack of self-confidence. Things like that can come into play very much. Irritability, those kinds of things can present themselves as well. And so there are some symptoms, if you will, of the brain trying to protect itself and trying to deal with some of those factors. And so it could be that there's something to that regarding, short-term memory issues, being overstimulated, trying to protect itself, that kind of a thing. The brain does a lot of remarkable things, and so it'd be interesting to talk more about that and kind of learn more about what that individual is experiencing. But that's definitely one of the things to think about.
Well, actually, I think we're going to be addressing it a little bit more. This next question is more about probably the brain because we have to explain the two parts, which we have kind of throughout this whole thing. But he says, how do you overcome internet addiction? What other healthy behaviors can be replaced with it when the urge hits? And can you suggest some trigger response plans for an addiction like porn, sex, to internet, etc.? So I'm going to go ahead. Let's just start with one question first. This is, how do you overcome internet addiction?
Okay, so thank you for that. I think that's kind of the elephant in the room, if you will. That's that kind of a question because it's such a broad question, but one that's very, very important for everyone who's listening in on this webcast. So overcoming internet pornography is a unique process, not because it's not because addiction itself is something that we haven't really learned much about. We have learned a lot about addiction, but because the nature of internet pornography is unique in terms of the ability to promote an extreme response in the brain. Internet pornography has several factors that cause it to be very unique as an addictive cause, if you will. One is that it's always available, always accessible. Another is that it is anonymous. Another is that it presents such a huge variety that is available. For all intents and purposes, anything that you can imagine that has a sexual or pornographic connotation is available on the internet. And so, and you can access it, as I said, anytime, any place, anywhere, and you can do so anonymously and without limitation. And so, because of that, we often refer to it as the perfect poison because it's so powerful and so prevalent, and it can invoke such a hugely powerful response in the brain that it becomes a very, very addictive behavior. So the process of overcoming that, it's a very in-depth answer, first of all, I would say, because there are certain components that are similar for all people, but there are many components that are going to be different for everybody. One of the things that is definitely directly involved in overcoming internet pornography is finding ways to manage the intense triggers that come along with that, being able to address those so that you find other healthy behaviors. So managing that addictive behavior becomes a process of essentially vigilance, if you want to refer to it that way. If you're vigilant of an urge, and you know that it is something that can easily be acted upon, you'll have to find a way, usually with some help, to be able to manage those intense triggers because they will come, and especially because they're so prevalent. And again, all those factors I mentioned about the internet aspect of internet pornography, it's very prevalent and a very big challenge because of that. So I think managing triggers is a huge part of recovery. That involves recognizing those triggers, recognizing circumstances in which the triggers are more likely to have impact on you. It also involves, I think this kind of leads into the second question, which, if I remember correctly, it related to how can I replace that behavior. One of the important ideas around recovery is that really there's not a true replacement for something as profoundly effective as internet pornography in terms of the impact it has on the brain. So what we're going to try to look at is, instead of replacement, we're going to look at what can I do to enable myself to be okay with more natural chemical responses in my brain, instead of trying to seek something that is basically the equivalent of a dopamine rush, much like drugs, like heroin. Instead of trying to say I'm going to replace that, we would look at the idea of what can I do to help my brain start to be okay with a normal amount of dopamine in my life, with normal behaviors, such as a normal sexual experience with my spouse, such as normal rewards kinds of experiences that come in life. Learning to be okay with those kinds of responses is a very long process when you're accustomed to the power of internet pornography. But that is something that, the idea of replacement, honestly, the replacement factor really isn't there because of it's such a tremendously powerful thing. But your brain can heal from that. It can recover from the need, the desire, the urging for such a high chemical response to the point where you feel like you can manage and that you feel peaceful and content and happy with the more normal, typical kinds of chemical responses that happen due to normal daily activities. Tony, what was the third question on that?
The third question is, can you suggest some trigger response plans for any addiction like porn, sex, internet, etc.?
Yeah, okay, great question, because as I mentioned in response to the first question about one of the keys to recovering from internet pornography abuse is being able to recognize and manage triggers. Some suggestions that I would give regarding being able to deal with those triggers is, well, first of all, I think the first key to that is being able to recognize the triggers for what they are. So a plan would be to start practicing recognition, first of all. What am I seeing as a first step in the trigger of the desire to use pornography or masturbate? We can, if we're careful and we take a close look at the situations and the environments of the decisions and the emotions that we feel in that process, we can usually trace that back to something that is a trigger. And that's definitely a huge part of managing those triggers, is being able to see what it is to begin with, because we may not recognize it. Now, in the case of being able to recognize that, once that is in place, I think one of the next steps, one of the suggestions I would have would be to have a specific plan in mind for when that particular trigger is experienced. An example would be, let's say I recognize that I often feel triggered if I am surfing the internet or if I'm on social media, for example. If I see videos on YouTube, or if I see images on Facebook or something like that, and those are triggering to me, and I know that because I've experienced that many times, I can have a plan in place to be able to address that, knowing that it will have a very serious impact, knowing that the trigger sets in motion things that are very powerful inside of my body and my brain, and that once I start down that road, it's very difficult to come back from that. So a plan might be to contact somebody that's close to you. For example, let's say I'm a young man who is struggling with a trigger, and I want to reach out to somebody. I might have a best friend or a series of close friends who I can simply call or text, and I can say, hey, I need to talk for a minute. I need a little bit of support right now because I'm having a difficult moment. Depending on your openness and your level of trust with that person, you may or may not get into the actual details of why you need some support. But you could simply reach out and say, hey, I just need someone to talk to for a minute. Can you just be with me? Can you just be there for me for a few minutes, and let's just hang out and talk on the phone, let's get together, whatever. So reaching out to somebody close to you who is prepared for that kind of situation would be a very good thing to do. Another suggestion would be, let me call out a different scenario. Let's say that every morning when one gets in the shower to get ready for the day, that is a triggering moment. That is a common scenario that I hear from a lot of individuals. And so if that's a triggering moment, think about some of the steps that you can take knowing full well that that's going to be powerful for you in that moment. So one step might be, okay, I'm going to shorten my shower. I'm going to get in and out very quickly because I know that as I remain in the shower, the trigger's going to be there longer, and the chances are that I'm going to be facing, increasing challenges in trying to overcome that trigger. So that's one example of something you might do. Another example might be to change the pattern. I might say, well, I'm going to take a bath instead of a shower, if that's something that could be helpful. I'm going to set an appointment that's going to require that I act quickly in preparing for the day, so that I'm not in that environment too long. That could be potentially triggering. So I'm in the shower at 7:30 and I have a responsibility that I have to attend to, whether it's a phone call or a meeting or whatever, at 7:45 or 8 o'clock or whatever, so that you've got something that's going to press you to use your time well, and you're able to manage that trigger more effectively. Those are a couple of suggestions for you on how to deal with some of those triggers that are very common.
For a lot of people, the shower is a huge trigger, and several addicts have talked to me about it and said that what they do is they actually set a timer. I mean, it's 5 minutes, in and out. That way they know as soon as that timer's off, it drives them crazy that they got to go out and get it. But yeah, that way they're not lingering in their trigger state. So
yeah, right.
We got a follow-up question that is a little bit intense with this. Well, actually, we got a comment first. The comment says, "Why is the internet porn addiction so different?" It's because it's very intense, very ubiquitous, free, easy to access. In the 19th century, porn existed, but it was very hard to access. Mm-hmm. So, just a comment from an individual.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, okay. I got a comment come in. Shower trigger? Turn the hot water off.
Yes, indeed. Cold showers. Those are not just a metaphor.
Exactly. You mentioned something about the planning, and that is so very important in the recovery process, and for everybody to be truly successful in life, is to plan their day. Just focus on the next 24 hours. Don't try to focus on, the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year. Focus on today and just plan out today, and it's extremely effective. Extremely effective.
Yeah.
Got a question that says, what about fetishes? Is the mechanism different? The thing that turns you on, you see it in streets?
Okay. Well, essentially, I think the quick answer to that question is the sexual triggers that can happen are still happening in the same way in the brain, right? They're still causing that reward system to be very highly activated. The chemical releases are happening, the adrenaline, the dopamine, the serotonin, all those kinds of things are still going on with those kinds of fetishes. And so part of that question is saying that is it still, I guess I'm going to assume here that one of the underlying questions with that comment is that still something that can be addictive. And so I would still say it definitely can be addictive, because it's activating the same reward centers in the brain in the same way. It still can be very, very addictive and very disruptive to life. So it's very real in the very same pattern that we've been talking about.
Okay, well that wraps it up for the night. Thank you so much, Torrey, for taking some time. We know that you've got a family and I've got a family, but we really are wanting to help people, and we really do appreciate all those who attended and for your questions. You can always send more questions in. We will answer them. We'll put them in the queue for the next webinar, which will be in February. And you can go to pornstinks.com to learn more about when that webinar will be. We haven't set the time yet. I'm in the process of scheduling out the full year. As soon as that's up, I'll let you know. But thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And as always, have a great day and stay focused on the recovery process. You can do it. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.